is there anything more wholesome and wonderful than Vinegar Syndrome's Black Friday sales? That most wonderful time in November where, for one weekend and some change, the boutique label above all other boutique labels throws mercy to the crowd with heavy discounts, new titles, merch, and sometimes other surprises too. I love Vinegar Syndrome's Black Friday sale, and while I do spread the love to other boutiques on Black Friday as well, for the last 5 or 6 years at least, it's been a bit of an annual tradition to get up an hour earlier than I usually would on Black Friday just to catch what VS has announced, and to swipe up any bargains I can before the inevitable rush intensifies and I lose any chance I might have of having scored that sweet, sweet Agfa or Bleeding Skull slipcase. And back in November 2023, I basically treated that year's VS Black Friday sale as a bit of a last hurrah, as I knew I was going into house hunting in 2024 and didn't know how much money I'd have once I was on the other side of it. Not a bloody lot, as chance would happen. Eugh. But of that year's sale, one title stood out head and shoulders above the others. A groovy looking little movie that caught my eye almost immediately for its hyper colourful hazy looking DIY slipcover, and of course if it has Agfa's name anywhere near it, it was going in my basket quicker than, well, a really quick thing, let me tell you now. What was that mysterious VHSified siren calling to me in that fuzzy warm ocean? Well, it was 2012's Video Diary of a Lost Girl, a play on the 1929 film Diary of a Lost Girl. Probably the best lo-fi, experimental, biblically charged film about fucking people to death that I've seen in a good while, with a hell of a set of chompers on it to boot. So the film itself is set in a surrealist, German expressionist, Steven Sayedian by way of Joel Hodgson style fuzzy verse, for lack of a better descriptive, and the film opens with a brief description of the events of Lilith, and from what I can see there is a slight variation from the Torah or biblical telling of Lilith here, but I'm open to creative liberties, so it's all good with me. In the biblical telling of the story, Lilith was created from dust to be a partner for Adam, but she's reluctant to be subservient to Adam as she believes the two are equals as they're both born from dust. As such, after a particularly heated encounter when the pair are having sex, Lilith flees the Garden of Eden and hides in a cave, where she begins giving birth to many, many children. God sends some angels to recapture her, but when she refuses to go, the angels punish her by telling her they'll kill 100 of her children every day that she doesn't return to Eden. Jesus. Anyway, as an act of revenge, Lilith returns to the garden, finds out that God has created Eve to replace her, and so she steals Adam's seed while he sleeps, and uses his seed to bear new children into the world called Lilium, who are demonic entities with succubus tendencies. This film shorthands that a little bit, opening in the Garden of Eden and explaining that Lilith and Adam were both created from dust, but that Lilith isn't entirely happy with her life in Eden. And after an incident where Adam forces himself onto her, she flees the Garden of Eden and travels through the Red Sea, eventually arriving in a location filled with demons with whom she makes love to, and, in turn, births a new race of women known as the Lilin. The Lilin look and act just like ordinary people, with maybe a little bit of a pomp thrown in for good measure because they're aware they aren't mortal and are kind of special in origin. They have a much longer lifespan than most humans, living to roughly around 1300 years old in good conditions. But while this is definitely a plus to the Lilin, it comes with a terrible curse. As God was furious with Lilith and her actions, he cursed her daughters to bleed to death at the turn of a full moon from their first period. However, there is a way to circumvent this. If Lilin have sex with a son of Adam on the night of a full moon, they'll delay the curse till the next full moon and kill the son of Adam in the process, taking a small part of their soul into them in the process. Enter Louise, our main protagonist for this film. Louise is unlike the other Lillian. She was unaware she even was Lillian until her first period and was essentially rescued by the other Lillian, who loosely explained what she needed to do to stay alive. Louise rejects the whole ideology of the Lillian and tries to keep that part of her life as compartmentalised as possible so that she can just get on with a fairly plain existence as an adult video checkout clerk. How does she deal with the whole bleeding to death on a full moon thing? Well, Louise is basically taken to purposely trying to lull rapists from the neighbourhood who she then ties up and fucks to death once a month. So it's basically a kind of unethical community service. But as mentioned, that comes with a cost, and every time she takes a horrendous piece of shit off the streets, a part of the soul ends up entangled with her own. leaving her feeling horrendous and warped most of the time. After taking home her latest necessity, Louise flashes back to a moment from her past in what I think was either the 1920s or 30s. She seemingly struck up a relationship with a rather suave-looking musician. The pair seemingly loved each other very much and eventually had sex, and, well, that was the moment Louise realised that she couldn't have sex with someone without killing them in the process. Through the mists of time, Louise is harshly awoken by a visit from her two sisters, who inform her that she's needed for part of an upcoming ceremony to commit a chosen one to Lilith. She refuses and a fight breaks out, but the sisters essentially inform her that it's not a request, it's an order, and that they'll remove her if she doesn't comply. Before leaving, one of the sisters tells Louise that she needs to be more selective with the men she picks up and to try and take home more nice guys, as they always come back for more. Confused by this, Louise, in a quieter moment, asks her other sister what was meant by this, and she's essentially told that the reason she feels awful is because she keeps fucking terrible people, and that once a part of a son of Adam's soul is bound to you, they'll almost always return to the Lillian that took it for one more time via a form of reincarnation. In the same conversation, spurred on from her earlier reminiscence, Louise asks her sister if Lillian are capable of love, to which the sister replies that they don't think it's impossible, but they personally have never experienced it. Later, while on shift, Louise's manager asks her if she can work late so that he can go on a date with a guy he's picked up. Begrudgingly, she accepts, and while doing inventory and closing the place down, she finds a half-hearted robber attempting to fleece the place. Only, this robber looks familiar. It's her old flame who she accidentally murdered all those years ago. Only now, far from being the suave and debonair, jazzy, bluesy Lothario with a heart, this guy's a bit awkward, fumbly, and weirdly aggressive. The pair butt heads over his frankly pathetic attempt to stick up the place, with him threatening to take his robberies elsewhere, and all the while Louise is trying to rationalise exactly what she's seeing because this guy clearly has no idea that he's the reincarnated version of her ex. And she's trying to fight seeing her loved one back in the room with him being a very much totally different person. He storms out and Louise manages to get her bearings, but the next day, he's back again. This time though, things are a little bit less hostile and the pair slowly start to warm to each other a bit. He reveals that his name is Charlie, and after some semi-sarcastic backing and forthing, the pair soft agree on a date night to go and see Nosferatu, a personal favourite. But before that, the Lillian have a ceremony to perform. Louise arrives and is largely snubbed by the other Lillian. It turns out that the ceremony is to offer the eldest Lillian of the group up as a sacrifice in the hopes that her death will lead to the birth of new Lillian. The chosen one, at last minute, has a change of heart, but the head of ceremonies refuses to relent, and on placing the sacred face of Lilith on her, she's killed. However, the ceremony, while initially promising, fails to bear fruit, leading to Louise and the other sisters discussing why the ceremony even happens in the first place, when Lillian can essentially live forever barring accidents. In private, the sisters admit that it's all kind of bullshit, but they don't feel compelled to do anything because of the tenacity of the other Lillian who want to do it. And what follows from here is a bit of an emotional rollercoaster, as Louise eventually comes clean to her manager about her Lillian ways, and Charlie and Louise begin to form stronger and stronger bonds. Louise realises it's only a matter of time before Charlie starts wanting more than just hand-holding and nice smiles. And so, she has to try and work up the courage to not only confront the man she's already loved in telling him about what she is, but also to decide whether it would be safer to just break things off before they get into dangerous territory, while also dealing with the fact that she's falling for him all over again. In a trippy and bittersweet finale that'll see heart, head and curse go blow for blow against each other, will Louise end things with Charlie to save him? Will the Lillian find a way to break the curse? And I need to know, does the cinema have a copy of Night Dreams, and will they take a check? All this and more will be answered if you check out Video Diary of a Lost Girl. And the work here that Lindsay Denniberg and Chris Shields have put into this picture is incredibly refreshing. They aren't exactly reinventing the wheel with this picture, but this particular combination of elements does feel unique, woozy, and is a bit of a rare thing these days. A film that manages to capture the spirit of a 2 AM hazy film viewing experience. For reference, when I first caught this film just over a year ago, I watched it in the middle of the day on a bright and sunny January afternoon, and at the time, I thought it was fine. but I didn't particularly feel grabbed by it. This time around, I knew exactly what I was getting into, so I grabbed a beer and tuned in for a rewatch at 2 in the morning over an extended Easter weekend, and the vibes were immaculate. It's a film that perfectly suits that slightly weary, hazy midnight movie fug that can only be achieved by watching in the early hours of the morning in a darkened room when the world's asleep and it's just you, the movie, and the fringes of your imagination running rampant. And I found that wonderfully refreshing. It's been a very long time since a more contemporary film has managed to give me that feeling of transcending my own living room, and no, I was not on drugs and I stuck to a 2-beer limit, and into a world I felt I shouldn't be seeing but was privy to whether I wanted to witness it or not. The script is, for me, a little bit wobbly, truthfully. I'm still fully finding my thoughts and feelings on the piece even after a rewatch, and absolutely to this film's credit, it will be one I revisit in the years to come to really truly try and find my own full meaning and understanding from it. This time around, I found the film very enjoyable, but not without fault. While the tone and plotting is border immaculate, balancing a wonderfully punky snark with some very intricate and intimate narrative tropes, a wonderful contrast of rage and vulnerability, I did struggle a little bit with the pacing of the piece. Admittedly, it does have a lot to cram into not a lot of time, but to me, the pacing felt a bit uneven, with the opening feeling nice and slow burn with occasional spikes of intense energy, but this gave way to a second act that chooses to slow things down quite substantially to help develop the bittersweet romance between Louise and Charlie. I get why they slowed things down a bit, it's to help better bed in the relationship and to help add weight to Louise's decisions in the third act. But for me, I felt it slowed down just a bit too much, and it seemed to lose some of its bite along the way in the process. It got right to the point where I was beginning to wonder where the third act was going to kick in when it did, and with it there was a slight increase in pacing and a bit of a return to the bite that drew me in the first act, but it still never quite managed to recapture that raw tone and vibe the first act puts in place, which was a bit of a shame, as it then also had a bit of a knock-on effect with other aspects of the script, giving the feeling that we were retreading old ground from the opening act and not really escalating things to a grand conclusion. Not to get too into spoilers here, but I'd be interested in knowing the director or scriptwriter's interpretation of the ending of the film in particular, as I took away from it that the final moments of the film were symbolic rather than literal, leading to a unique conclusion that's simultaneously downbeat while ending about as well as this piece could have ended. Outside of the structuring, our characters here are kind of in a unique position. I would generally bemoan a cast of characters that only feel like they exist for the length of the movie they're in. I personally love it when a film gives their characters a rich and deep history that makes it feel like the world we're in has been going almost in tandem with our own, and that when the film ends, the characters could in theory continue on well past the end credits. The characters here have some degree of depth in the sense that they're both long-living spawns of Lilith who've existed through at least 500 to 1300 years of this reality's history, but other than for the purpose of this film's core plot, they don't really explore that very much. Louise in and of herself is a bit of a mystery because we see her in the 20s and 30s and we see her in the modern day of 2012, but the film is a bit coy to explore the impact of the Lillian on this world. And they also don't really explore the "they always come back" trope much either beyond the core narrative element. In fact, I was convinced for a time that there was going to be some kind of revelation that Louise had effectively been killing the same rapist reincarnated as increasingly twisted and demented figures across her history, and that she just hadn't realised it because she was that desensitised to the experience by that point as a kind of comment on how trauma impacts people. But the film never really goes that deep, and as such, while what is there is good, it does leave it in places feeling a little bit superficial. That being said, given that the film's really more about focusing on love rather than reincarnations of hate, and that this is essentially a surrealist picture that's best enjoyed in the twilight hours, I'm inclined to accept that this film didn't need to be Barry Lyndon when it came to character depth and complexity. Throw in some very nice dialogue choices, some of which reminded me quite fondly of John Waters' earlier pictures, though maybe just a smidge toned back to help better fit the world, and you have a thoughtful and interesting script that, while imperfect, definitely held my attention for the full duration, and when it hit hard, my friends. The script was written by Chris Shields. He has 2 writing credits and is really more of an actor than a writer. However, both this film and his other credit, a short film called Sex Machine 2025, are both absolutely to a decent standard and are worth your time. The film was directed by Lindsay Denniberg, who has 6 writing and directing credits at the time of recording, 4 shorts and 2 features. A counterculturalist and fellow fan of the wonderful world of lomography, I was delighted to hear that at some point in 2022 or 2023 she completed her latest feature called Killer Makeover. And while I don't have a link to where you can check it out to hand, I will link to Lindsays Linktree as it's full of interesting offshoots to all things lo-fi and her other projects. On the direction front, it's equally a bit of a game of two halves. The actual visual direction I can't flaw. The aesthetic and style of this film is absolutely my kind of bag. I worked in similar styles when I used to make films myself, so I'm almost always going to champion films that take a risk on mixing formats and curating each and every location, scene and style to match the exact tone required. This arrangement of green screen, digital, digibeta and VHS footage combined with the choice to do image degradation on parts of the film to add to the woozy vibes and to experiment with static and feedback creates a visually striking piece before we even get into the set design, which in and of itself is equally wonderful, combining elements of German expressionist cinema with a cardboard DIY aesthetic that only really enhances the surreal feelings the film gives off, while giving it a sense of much needed grounding. The use of these raw materials in building the set space and the customization of the props to match the new wave art aesthetic subconsciously gives the audience something to cling to as we hurtle through this production's strange and otherworldly kinda love story. Clear thought has been put into every scene setup, every shot captured, and the cast's placement within the frame and coordination with lighting, sound, and a clear end goal as far as post-production is considered creates a visual feast from a filmmaker with a distinct voice in the ecosystem. However, to that end, I do feel like the cast direction wasn't this film's strongest suit. It's an element of this production that I did struggle with as to whether the minimalist cast direction here was intentional or an oversight. The cast, for the most part, stay fairly grounded. They don't move around too much unless instructed to within the shot list, i.e. an actor moving in closer so the cut to a mid-close matches, and I did struggle a bit with the fact that everyone here is all so static. Or at most is moving in a kind of floaty minimalist way to just kind of help set things up for the frame cuts and not much else. The few moments where improvisation is utilised, it feels a bit forced and didn't quite do it for me. I'm still finding my feelings as to whether I like what's done on this front, as I understand why it is the way it is ultimately, but at the same time, it maybe would have been nice to have seen a bit more confidence within the cast to utilise the set and green screen space a bit more, and maybe engage more with the props. On the cine front, again, it's pretty much no flaws from me. We have a clear and considered set of scenes here with a director at the helm who is not afraid to experiment and is plentiful with the B-roll. Lighting is maybe a little flatter than I'd have liked if I'm going to critique anything, but they compensate by experimenting with colour, plugins and filters. While I think this film maybe would have benefited from some more complex lighting arrangements, the graveyard and flashback scenes were screaming for some more focused chiaroscuro in my opinion. This is a small critique from me, as what is presented here is a punchy set of shots that are once again striking, colourful and very well edited together. A not insignificant number of shots from this film could have easily been hung in my living room, and as soon as I found out that one of the director's influences for this film was Liquid Sky, I immediately knew I was onto a good thing with this one. Probably my single biggest gripe about this entire film lies, unfortunately, with the performances. For me, while I totally appreciate that this is a film that's supposed to be set in a surreal otherverse, I just didn't find this cast believable for the most part in their delivered performances. I know they're going to be playing away from a grounded, standard character type here because this is Crazy World, but even so, the film didn't manage to convince me that this was a knowing choice. I just came away feeling like the cast didn't really convince me of the parts they were playing. Pris McEver as Louise is probably the strongest physical performer in this film. Her body language tells the audience more about her situation than any of the dialogue she speaks through the runtime. But her performance is a little spotty for me. While convincing and enjoyable for the most part, there were just a few moments that didn't really land for me, to the extent that it pulled me out of the film. Casey Puccini as Michael, Louise's boss, is a welcome comic foil, and the dynamic between him and Louise I felt worked really well. It reminded me a bit of the works of Sarah Jacobson, and in particular Mary Jane's Not a Virgin Anymore, in the sense that it's the closest the film comes to having something approaching a naturalistic and realistic feeling friendship. It's held together on professional bounds, but I liked him and thought he had a good physicality and delivery, a nice contrast to the rest of the cast. Chris Shields as both Charlies is fine enough, but I kind of have issue with the split way the character is played. 20s or 30s Charlie feels like a believable and natural, if at times played up slightly, character, despite us not really getting to spend that much time with him. Modern Charlie, by contrast, feels a bit over-dramatised by contrast. I know that the key theme of the performance is for our two cast members to front with stark, aggressive personalities, and then, as they warm to each other, the vulnerabilities fall until we're left with the real deal by the third act. But Charlie's character is so uneven personality-wise and hard to pin down, really, that I think Chris struggled to really bring the character any degree of grounding, resulting in a bit of an awkward performance, in my opinion, that didn't quite hit the mark. With the supporting cast suffering similar issues just purely from the fact that it doesn't feel like their backstories were adequately or consistently developed enough to help them really bed their characters into the performances. I don't think there's a bad performance here per se, but I do feel like it could have stood to have had a couple more rehearsals to really nail the tone and vibe required. And finally, the soundtrack. It's awesome. A really decent electronic synth soundtrack that feels like mid-80s new wave goth pop. It suits the tone of the film perfectly, hits every edit mark without issue, and I had a really good time with it. At a push, I'd argue that more variety is always a good thing, but honestly, I have no issues with this. Video Diary of a Lost Girl was released in 2012 and played the festival circuit through most of 2012 onwards. I'm not sure if the film was available digitally for a time, but Lindsay did appear as a contributor on the 2013 documentary Adjust Your Tracking, and clips of Lost Girl were uploaded to Lindsay's official YouTube account throughout the 2010s. It seemingly got its worldwide physical media debut in July 2023, when AGFA released it on Blu-ray with a huge number of extras, including a large chunk, if not all, of both Lindsay and Chris's short films, a making-of featurette, audio commentary with Lindsay, and much, much more. The release looks great. It's still in stock as of the time of recording, but supply is running low, so I advise you jump on it while you still can. Link will also be in the description. Video Diary of a Lost Girl is a kaleidoscope of a movie, pulling inspiration from so many cultural touchstones and tying it together into an explosion of ideas, colours and concepts. While I had my gripes with it overall, I absolutely appreciate and wholeheartedly support the work done here. And it's definitely made me excited to check out Lindsay's new film, whenever it makes its way to international audiences. Definitely one that I can say is worth your time. I think it would pair up really well with something like Stephen Sayadian's Dr. Caligari, Liquid Sky, or Sarah Jacobson's Mary Jane's Not a Virgin Anymore. Get it while it can be got, my friends. Till next time.